Welcome to this Lousy Little Kitchen. I'm your host, Rob Anderson. Wouldn't you love to cook a grand meal in a well-stocked industrial kitchen? Can you imagine it? Counter space as far as the spatula can sing, a place for every appliance, and two of every attachment for each one. A turkey in the oven, pies cooling on the sill, and a whole extra refrigerator just for cold and tasty beverages.
Oh, but I live here. So, welcome to my lousy little kitchen. If you're like most people, you live in an apartment or a small house. Or if you're like me, you might live in a 100-year-old home with a kitchen afterthought. 50 years out of date. But do not fret, my culinary compatriots. Your fellow cramped cook is here to help. Chances are, if you're watching my video, you're like me. I'm a simple guy with simple needs and more hunger than time and slightly more time than money. We will have tips and tricks on cooking for one on a small budget in even the smallest of kitchens. So come along with me and visit this lousy little kitchen.
On this very special edition of This Lousy Little Kitchen, we'd like to welcome a personal friend of ours, Pat McDougall. Pat's going to create, or rather recreate, his great-grandmother's potato bread recipe. Take it away, Pat.
So you see, I was digging through the cabinet this morning and I found these russet potatoes. They've been in the cabinet just a wee bit too long. These tater made, I love that name, those American, those are so funny. These taters, they're just a little bit too soft. They're not going to be good for eating. So we're going to boil them up and make some potato bread instead. Let's have some fun today, shall we? As you can see, we chunked up the potatoes to make them lots of surface area. That way it goes into the water more easily. Now I could have just used whole potatoes, but that just would take a really long time. By chopping them up, more of the inner meat is exposed to the water, and so more of the carbohydrates will find themselves in the solution, and that's really our goal. Now another commonly asked question about the potato water is exactly how long do you boil the potatoes? The correct answer is, I don't know. I'm going to boil them till they're so soft they fall apart in the spoon. When they fall apart in the spoon, that means a lot of their carbohydrates are floating around in the water, and that's what you want. You want to make a strong gluten fibre with the carbohydrates. That adds a sweetness to the potato bread that separates it from other white breads, and that's what makes it yummy. Now you might be tempted to ask, how many potatoes and how much water? Well, the fact is no one's ever actually done a study, so we just make enough, and then we find out later if it was enough, and if it wasn't, well, we try it again later. Someone should actually do a real study. As we see here, the water's starting to boil over. That's a good sign. That means a lot of the carbohydrates are now getting into the solution, causing this foaming action you see here. If we pull up the potatoes, look how chunky they are. They're starting to fall apart just from the spoon action, and that's really what we're looking for. We're going to go just a moment longer, and then we're going to pull this water out and use it to make some fine potato spread. Alright, it looks like the bubbles are starting to die down a little bit, and as you see, there's little potato flakes all over the spoon. I'm going to mix this up a little bit and blow the bubbles down. Let's take a look at the water. Oh yeah, as you can definitely tell that the potatoes themselves are just falling apart, and that's what we're looking for. Let's take a look at the water itself. Oh, look at that, nice and grey, lots of little potato bits floating in it. Alright, we're going to turn this off and let it cool down for a little while. If it's too hot, it'll kill all the yeast, and we don't want to do that now, do we? We want the bread to be nice and fluffy. So, let's cool it down and see what happens. Our recipe also calls for some dry yeast. One packet should do it, but according to the directions here, the one packet is the equivalent of 2¼ teaspoons, which I have in this, and 1/3 of a cup of granulated sugar. That gives the yeast something to gnash on when it starts to grow. And that's exactly what we want to make the bread rise and become nice and fluffy. Since the potatoes were boiling, you'll see that the water's awfully hot. Now yeast prefers a temperature around 100 to 110 degrees Fahrenheit, so we're just going to leave this on the stove for a while and let it cool down. When it gets to the right temperature, we'll add the yeast, the sugar, and let it start to rise. Now, as you see here, the temperature's finally dropped well below 120. It's still warm to the touch, like a nice bath, but it's not so warm that it's going to kill the yeasties. 100 to 110 Fahrenheit is the recommended temperature. I don't have a thermometer that measures that, so we'll assume it's close enough. What are you going to do now, you say? Well, just a moment and I'll show you. So the next thing you need to realise, we need a cup and a half or 12 ounces of this potato water. So I'm going to use a sieve and I'm just going to pour right from the pot until we get what we need. So let's see here. Alrighty, fill her up. And a little spill there, nothing worries, it's easy to clean up. Oh, it's getting a little gooey. So, I'm going to dump it back in, let it filter, and try it again. Add a little more. And when it gets too thick, throw it back. And we'll keep going until we get it set. After rinsing the sieve a little bit, we should be able to get to the rest of our water. And we'll just keep dumping her in there. Oh, this lovely potato water. Alright, time for another rinse. So it did finally take a couple of tries, a couple of rinses, but then you have your cup and a half potato water. But the real question comes in, Pat, what do you do with all that excess material? You got so much potato there, what are you going to do with it? Well, don't you be fret, there's no reason to waste it. It's perfectly good, mashed up potatoes. Let's dry it out a wee bit, add some milk and some butter, mash it up some more. We're going to have mashed potatoes for supper. So, we got the water off and there's still no waste. That's called being frugal. Alrighty, we're over here at the mixer now, and I've got my cup and a half of potato water. You see it's nice and thick, there's even a layer where it's thinner water and thicker stuff. And we're going to add to that some sugar. I've got 1/3 of a cup of granulated sugar. Just going to pour that in there. That gives the yeasties something to try onto. And speaking of yeasties, we've got 1 packet or 2 1/4 of yeasty beasties. Now we're going to toss those in there. And we're going to give it a little stir, and we're just going to see what happens. Be back in just a moment. Now all we've done here is stir it up a wee bit, and as you can see, the yeasty beasties are already starting to spread out. In fact, the air is already beginning to fill with a sweet yeasty smell. It won't be long now. We're going to let this sit for 4 or 5 minutes and see if we can get some foam in action. Now we look at our yeasty beasties again. You can tell they're starting to foam up. While they're getting ready, there's a couple of more things we need. We're going to get 2 tablespoons of shortening. Nasty, nasty stuff. Just smile and pretend that you're not actually doing it and do it anyway, because it really does make a difference. And we're also going to need 2 teaspoons of salt. Just a little bit, a pinch to give it some more flavour. Now you want to be careful. Don't put the salt in with the yeast and the sugar. Yeasties can die in a salt environment. Now there's probably not enough in this to kill all of them. But if you slow down the batch, it takes longer to do everything. Now, we're going to get the shortening and the salt, and we're going to mix it in there, now that the yeasties are growing. Give it a few minutes, and then we're going to go to the mixer. I'll be right back with you. We are almost ready to begin. I've got the salt and the shortening now mixed in there, and it's still bubbling away, so we didn't kill our yeasties, that's a good thing. And I've got about 3 cups, no, not 3 cups, about 5 half cups. 5 half cups of flour. Now, why 5 half cups? Well, very simply, you're supposed to use 2 1/2 cups, but I only have a half cup measure, so 5 half cups should be pretty darn close. We are now ready to start the machine. Now, I'm going to follow up. There's going to be some noise, so hold your ears. We're going to lock the machine in place. We're going to start by adding the liquids, then we're going to add the solids a few at a time. I'll show you some, and then I'll cut off, because it's a bit of a process, but it's what you do. Alright, here we go. Oh, there's our gooey bits. Oh, it's wonderfully disgusting, it is. Yeah, it's kind of gross. But you know what? It's going to make some beautiful bread. That's what matters the most, isn't it? There's a little lump of yeasty there, but I think we got plenty. Alright, now we're going to start with our flour. I'm going to add just a little bit. Just a little bit. Dump it down in there, because we'll add a bit at a time. We don't want to add too much. we're going to turn it on very slowly, and we're going to let it go a bit. Now eventually I'll grab a spatula and I'll push all that down in there, but we like to add just a wee bit at a time. I'm going to add the whole 2.5 cups, or should I say 5 half cups. And when that's done, I'll show you what it looks like while it's whipping. I'll be back here in just a moment. There now, I've added all the yeast and the flour and the sugar. So we're going to get this thing out of the way here, and of course that shortening, boy, it's just nasty. But it's so important, it does a mean job on the dough. As you can see, it's starting to whip up, we're seeing the dough come together, but there's also a lot of it stuck inside. So, we're going to go in with our spatula and work our way around. Oops, got some flour up here. I'll try to knock that down in there. It's good flour, don't want to waste that now. That's being frugal, you know. So we're going to keep mixing this all in. I'll just keep pushing it down where it goes. And eventually this will all come into one big lump of dough. I'll come back to you and tell you how long it was. So it's been just about 2.5 minutes now. So we're starting to see how silky and smooth it is. That's what we want to see. That means that the yeast bitsies and the flour bitsies and the potato bitsies are forming what we call gluten. And glutens are long strings of carbon fibres. And what that makes is a nice, rich bread that will stick together nicely. And then, as the yeast starts to rise, it'll build up more and more and make a nice fluffy bread with a nice solid crust. It'll be so delicious and yummy. We're going to pause here for just a moment. I'm going to dump this out, and then we're going to knead by hand, because then you can really get a feel for it. Here we go. So after I started hand kneading, I realised it was far too thin. So I brought it back over to the mixer, and I put in about another half a cup of flour. Let the mixer go for another several minutes. I'd say overall we're about 10 minutes total now. If I slow this down a bit, you can see how much silkier and smoother the dough is. That's really what we wanted the first time. So I will pull it out, we'll take it back over to the slab, and we'll knead it by hand and see what we can get out of it. So if there's one wonderful thing I've learned about bread, all the science in the world can tell you what you should do. But when it comes down to really making the bread, it's more of an art than a science it is. You've got to feel the dough, you've got to give yourself to your job, and you've got to really work it by hand. The machine does a marvelous job of setting you up, but it's the hand kneading that really makes the difference. So I'm going to fold and press and fold and press and fold and press until I get a nice spongy ball. It'll actually push back on me when I push on the bread. And that, oh, it's starting to feel that way already. This is really so much better. This is what it should look like. Now right now it's going to be very dense. If you were to eat it like this, it'd be perfectly healthy. There's nothing in here you can't eat. But it wouldn't be very tasty, and it wouldn't feel very good. It'd be very chewy. So stretch it out, get all the surfaces. Look at it, oh, look at how much you pull it and it just sticks together. That's what you want. That means you've got lots of glutinous fibres in there, and that's giving us gonna be a nice, wonderful bread. Let me squeeze it out a little bit more. Every piece of it feels like it's coming together. All those wet spots. Oh, that's so nice there. My Grammy will be proud. So I'll tell you about my Grammy. This is a recipe that's come down in several generations, starting probably before than what we know, but my great-grandmother, Zella Pollock, my mother's mother, used to make potato bread every day, or nearly every day, and believe it or not, she had neither electric nor gas. Her kitchen, she had a wood stove. Every morning, she'd go grab some firewood, start up the stove, she'd boil up some potatoes, or sometimes she used the water from the night before because we ate a lot of mashed potatoes as a kid. It was an easy thing to get. And she would fire up the stove. In the process, she'd knead out the dough. Now, she didn't have a fancy machine like I did, so she had to do a lot more kneading and turning than I do. But in the long run, she made some of the best potato bread we've ever had. Mine pales in comparison. And that's the one sad thing. When Grandma Zella Pollock passed, there were a few of us, my father, tried to get the recipe, but to no avail. She took many of our secrets with her, kind of a funny story. When my father tried to get the recipe, he'd say, "Okay, Grammy, how much flour?" And she'd go over to the cabinet and she'd pick out a cup. Not a measuring cup, mind you, but a coffee cup or a drinking cup. And she'd say, "This one to the correct line." My father would look at it and say, "Oh, so we have the yellow cup with the crack in it up to the point where the crack begins." Well, then my father would measure out that much flour, and then from there he'd turn the flour over into a proper measuring cup and come up with what he thought it should be. So, at this point, this is just about perfect dough. I know it looks like a pizza, but we're going to roll it back up into a bowl, and we're going to put it into another fancy machine here in just a moment, and I'll show you that when we're ready. We'll be right back. Oh, now we've got to show you another neat toy. As you see, we turned out the dough. It's a lovely little ball now, and I sprayed this all with oil so it's all set up. We put the ball right in the middle and rolled it around a little bit so it's all covered. Now we're going to put it in this little box here. This is a marvellous little thing. Even though it's a plenty humid day, which is why I probably needed the extra flour, this device has an ability to create some extra heat. So, I'll turn it on there. It'll set the temperature at 81 degrees and warm up everything in there. We're going to let this sit for 45 minutes, maybe up to 2 hours. We'll see how long it takes. When the dough doubles in size, we're going to come back, we're going to punch it down, knead it up again, and then we're going to make a second round of raising. We're going to make some amazing potato bread coming right back after this. Well, it's been a couple of hours in the raising machine. Let's take a look and see how we're doing. Oh, isn't that lovely? It's at least twice the size it was originally. So we're going to take it out and punch it down. When I say punch it down, clean hands by the way, everything's been washed. When I say punch it down, I mean we're going to push the air out of it, flatten it out. Then we're going to set it up for our second raisin, which will actually be in the form we're going to serve it. So give us just a moment, I'll transfer it, and then we'll talk some more. Alrighty, I got my board back out. This is, of course, that piece of marble you were using earlier. I'll put some more flour on it. Again, clean hands, always important. Now, let's take a look at this dough. I'm just going to drop it right out of there. Oh, isn't that lovely? Just a beautiful nice dough right there. So we're going to work on it just a little bit more. Punch all the excess air out of it. Get it nice and worked down. It looks a bit like a pizza now, doesn't it? But that's not what we're going to make. Alrighty. So, for today's pieces, we're going to make this. We're going to make rolls. And these rolls, there's 12 of them on this panel. Now to make 12 rolls, we're going to start with one lump of dough. And then we're going to break it into 12 pieces. Now there's a couple of ways we can do this. This is where your maths really come in. And it's very important to know your maths when you're cooking. So for the maths for this, 12 pieces out of 1. We could cut it in thirds, and from there cut those into fourths. Or we could cut it into fourths, and from there cut those into thirds. But there's an extra step. I don't need 12 pieces, I actually need 36, because I'm going to put 3 pieces in each one of these, and it'll make a wonderful little 3-part roll, which is just wonderful to eat. So I think we're going to start with fourths. So to cut it in fourths, you start by cutting it in half. Nice knife was always helpful. Take a half and cut it in half. So I have a quarter of my dough approximately. Now if I was really serious about it, I could go through and weigh these each out and then be sure from there. But this is 1/4. And this is 1/4. And this is 1/4. I don't want 4 pieces though, I want 12. So I'll cut this roughly in thirds. And again, this is something I could probably weigh out on a scale if I really wanted to. But I'm not gonna. I just don't feel that we're working that hard on it. Alrighty, so we'll get all of these broken apart. Get this cut also into thirds. And this cut into thirds. Even now it's still trying to rise, it's getting bigger as we go. So I have all these thirds now of my original dough. But that gives me 12 pieces. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 and 12. But I don't want 12, I actually want 36, and I'll show you why here in just a moment. In order to make sure nothing sticks, I'm going to use our little spray bottle here. I love using these things, they're so wonderful. I've just got vegetable oil in here, you could use Crisco or whatever it is you use. And I'm going to spray this down, that way when it goes in the oven, it'll be nice and slick and everything will come right out when they're done. Now, I'm going to take one of these, roll it into a nice little ball. So I've got flour on my hands, now I've got some oil on my hands, everything's nice and slick. Roll it into a ball, flatten it out just a little bit, and I'm going to cut it into thirds also. So this is where I'm going to end up with a total of 36 pieces, and I'll show you why here in just a moment. So roll it to a nice little ball, drop it in there, roll this piece into a nice little ball, drop it in there, and squeeze them aside. And now, one more, roll it into a ball and squeeze it in there. So I have 3 little round balls tossed in there. Now I know they look silly right now, but after it bakes you won't notice the difference. I'm going to go ahead and do the other 12 and then I'll get back to you. Alright, here we go. Alright, as you see here we've got all of the dough spread out. Now you'll notice some of these are very fine and pretty and some of them are just sort of glopped in there. Well, I did a thing called a pensioner roll on these. It takes a little extra work, but it makes a much prettier roll. When we're done with baking, I'll bring them out and show you again. Now this over here, after I cut everything up and I put them all in the little spots here, in the little indentations in this silicone tray, I noticed some of them were a little too thick. Like this one may still be a little too thick. And I pulled some of the excess out. And I decided to play with it. You know what? It's kind of like playing with the clay. You know, it's just very therapeutic. You build with it, you play with it. I even use a little dog cookie cutter here, just because, you know, why not, right? Make a cinnamon roll and a smiley face, just because. Well, here, more of a smiley face. There we go. Nice little smiley face, because it's just extra dough. It's just going to go to waste anyway. I might as well play with it. We'll bake it all and see what happens. Next we're going to go for the second rise. Give me just a moment and I'll get the raising machine back out and we'll go from there. Now guys, we have fresh from the oven. Here's the rolls we made out of the potato bread. And right over here, my lovely assistant Maura is actually turning the wasted potatoes into, well, it's supposed to be mashed potatoes, maybe potato soup, but mashed potatoes or potato soup for tonight's dinner. So we're going to put some butter on these and we're going to have a great time. Rob, I want to thank you for having me on the show. It's been a great pleasure.